trying to create sustained mayhem on the streets of the UK while warning of a staggering rise in children investigated for terrorism.
Sadly, 13% of all those being investigated by MI5 for involvement in UK terrorism are under 18. That's a threefold increase in the last 3 years.
Coming up, we'll ask why more and more children are being linked to terror plots. Also tonight, water firms are ordered to pay back customers more than £150 million because of poor performance. We'll take a look at whether it's going to make a difference to your bills. Plus, a warning from hospices over unsustainable financial pressures as they call on the government to take action over funding. And how a British mountaineer and her American climbing partner survived after being trapped in the Himalayas for 3 days. All that's come and much more on the UK Tonight. The head of MI5 said today that his agency has one hell of a job to do to counter the terror threats that are facing the UK. Director General Ken McCullum issued a stark warning, saying the country is facing wide-ranging threats from the Middle East and Russia, whilst raising concerns about the resurgence of groups such as Al-Qaeda and so-called Islamic State. The spy chief also said that there has been a staggering increase in the number of children being investigated for terrorism here in the UK, with online memes drawing under 18s into right-wing ideologies. Well, our home editor, Jason Farrell, has been following this story for us today and actually spoke to the head of MI5 after his speech, because he doesn't speak publicly very often. But today he felt compelled to, it seemed.
Yeah, and I think when I heard I was going to this briefing of MI5, I thought it would be about the kind of emerging threat from the conflict in the Middle East. But actually, no, there were, I would say, three really striking themes. One was the emergence of young people becoming more radicalised and getting involved in terrorism plots. The second thing was that 48% increase in state-led plots against the UK, predominantly talking about Russia and Iran. And the third thing was the re-emergence of Islamic State and Al-Qaeda. Here's what we heard.
Old foes are back, such as Al-Qaeda and Islamic State. States such as Russia and Iran are plotting against us. And ever younger people are being radicalised in new ways online. The threat is evolving, says the man with the job of protecting the country.
It'll be clear to you that MI5 has one hell of a job on its hands. The first 20 years of my career here were crammed full of terrorist threats. We now face those alongside state-backed sabotage and assassination plots against the backdrop of a major European land war.
Since the war in Ukraine, 750 Russian diplomats, many of them spies, have been expelled from European countries. But Russia is using other means to disrupt Britain.
The GRU in particular is on a sustained mission to generate mayhem on British and European streets. We've seen arson, sabotage and more.
Iran is another malicious state actor. The foiling of a plot against journalists working for Iran International in London was just one of many.
We've seen plot after plot here in the UK at an unprecedented pace and scale. Since January 2022, with police partners, we have responded to 20 Iran-backed plots presenting potentially lethal threats to British citizens and UK residents.
He said that both Russia and Iran were sometimes using criminals to do their dirty work and warned the intelligence services would come after them.
Here at the Counter-Terrorism Operations Centre, the Director General of MI5 painted a picture of a multifaceted terrorist threat with resurgent organisations such as Islamic State and state-backed terrorism from countries like Iran and Russia, but also people accessing hatred and misinformation online.
MI5 finds that teenagers, often radicalised online, make up an increasing proportion of their terror suspects, particularly among the extreme right. Examples include Mason Reynolds, who planned to attack a synagogue in Brighton, and Daniel Harris, whose videos were linked to 2 mass shootings in the US.
Tragically, as of today, of the people that we are currently investigating for involvement in UK terrorism, 13%, so about 1 in 8, are under the age of 18.
As for the conflict in the Middle East, it has not yet translated to large-scale terrorism here, but it certainly adds to what MI5's boss calls the most complex, interconnected threat environment we've ever seen. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Well, Jason, I just wanted to pick up on something that the head of MI5 said in his speech, and you discussed it with him afterwards, that Russia is trying to create sustained mayhem on the UK streets. That's quite an alarming sentence. What does he mean by that? What does that look like?
Yeah, he talked about sustained a mission to generate mayhem on Britain's streets. He didn't specify greatly. He did say arson. He said sabotage, and he said and much more. And then when asked directly what he meant by much more, he wouldn't specify, but he talked about an increasing recklessness. But what he's talking about with the GRU is Russia's military intelligence agency, who were thought to be responsible for the Salisbury poisoning. And the fact that their capabilities to an extent has been damaged by the fact that diplomats have been expelled from various European countries, to about 750 now, and that they are trying to basically supplement that with the criminal fraternity. So trying to actually recruit criminals to carry out their dirty work, as he put it, just cause whatever disruption they can, whatever those plans are. And he had a message for those criminals saying, if you take money from Iran or Russia or any other state to carry out illegal acts, he talked about the apparatus of the security services coming down on you, and he said you will regret it.
OK, Jason, thank you. At this point, I'm going to bring in Jonathan Hall, KC, an independent reviewer of terrorism legislation. Good to have your company here this evening with us, Jonathan. You were listening there to what Jason had to say after speaking to Ken McCullum earlier on. Your thoughts on his speech today?
Well, I think you can bet that Ken McCullum, when he joined MI5, didn't think that he was going to be investigating children. I mean, the figures are really, really staggering. It's something that people like me have been warning about for a long time now. Every year, the number of children getting arrested by counter-terrorism police, not just by ordinary police, by counter-terrorism police, has just gone up and up and up. It was 42 last year. And there was a point he made in the speech which almost you can forget, but I think is key. He says, don't underestimate the centrality of the internet. I mean, it sounds boring, but we are now in a completely new and entrenched pattern where often very lonely and isolated children and younger people are finding their meaning online. And unfortunately, what they get drawn to are the extremes. And to me, that was the really striking thing. I mean, there's other very, very interesting things, but at the core of this was that the way in which the threat is presenting now is changing. He even said, actually, thinking about the state threats as well, as Jason was saying, the Russian spies have been expelled from the embassies. So how are they going to reach people to carry out acts of sabotage? They're going to reach them again through the internet. So the internet is now right at the heart of the terrorism and the state threat picture.
Well, Jonathan, when we talk about the internet and what goes on online, we know only too well how difficult that is to legislate, to control, to monitor, particularly when it comes to children, because children have access to the internet on their phones, laptops in their bedroom. How difficult is MI5's job? Because they said it's complicated, but how on earth do they monitor that kind of activity?
Well, it's very difficult for them to work out which people who are looking, which children who are looking at horrible gore and Islamic State propaganda, and it tends to be neo-Nazi propaganda, often with things like Satanism involved. How do you distinguish between that, which is bad, damaging for their health, but they're not going to actually do something, and that very small number of people who might actually go and do something? I think that was the real difficulty he was talking about. They can become aware of people looking at stuff, but then how do they work out who do they put their surveillance assets on? How do they develop a lead? Do they get counter-terrorism police involved? So that's really, really hard. And you're completely right. Dealing with the online problem is a massive generational challenge. I mean, the UK's Online Safety Act is supposed to help. We're going to have to see how it works. It's going to come on into force at the end of the year. Ofcom, who are the government regulator who are in charge of that, we'll have to see how they get on with it. But it is, been no doubt, is a massive, massive generational challenge. Different countries dealing with it differently. Some countries will simply say, let's pull everything from the internet and be like China or Russia. in complete charge of everything that people can see. Other countries will say they're going to tell the internet companies to take things down. But the problem there is that some of these companies, they're very rich, they're very powerful, they're not based in the UK, and they might just say no, like Elon Musk on Twitter or X. The way in which it's going to be dealt with in the UK is to set up this new system, and we'll have to see what happens. But as I say, be in no doubt, this is the most important thing about terrorism and state threats that exist at the moment.
Jonathan, at this point, I'm going to bring Jason back in to remind us about something else the head of MI5 said, and he was talking about Islamic extremism, and we're used to that term and we're used to that being associated with terror plots and activity. But he did talk about the rise in right-wing ideologies, particularly online. What did he have to say about that?
Well, he said that when it comes to how they've split what they're dealing with at the moment, it's 75% Islamic extremism, 25% is far-right extremism. But he also talked about a dizzying range of ideologies. He actually said the far-right extremism was particularly skewed when it came to those young people who were getting involved. But I asked him about that, actually, because when you think about online radicalisation, you think of preachers,
you think of one figure
accessing
or a group.
Islamic State or Al-Qaeda propaganda. And there isn't that kind of similar thing really on the far right. You know, he said, you know, there are no prominent radicalisers, and he described it to me as what you get is a kind of pick and mix, and you know, a crowdsourced model. He described it, where you're getting all sorts of picking up of different kind of messages. He said that the far right were very good at kind of canny online memes, he said in his speech, and that's being used to draw people in. But I think that is adding another layer of complication onto all of this, is actually how people are getting radicalised is almost unique in every case.
Yeah, Jonathan, I want to get your thoughts on that, because if you have an online account, if you are on X or something like that, I mean, you don't have to be seeking this stuff out. You are bombarded with different ideologies, different snippets of speeches, different memes. How much of a problem does that pose? Because, of course, as Jason said, you know, you're not just looking at one group and where their information is going. You're not just looking at one figure and where their information is going. It's pick and mix.
I think you're ignoring the fact that children are agents. They're not just passive recipients of content that is given to them by radicalisers or which is given to them by algorithms. I mean, the very sad and bleak truth is that there are a lot of lonely, isolated people who look to the internet for meaning, and they will actually go out looking for this stuff. So it's often described as going down the rabbit hole. Someone will see something and say, I like it, and they will work out where to go. And there are certain sites where there's very little regulation, and they will be able to find precisely what they want. I think one of the mind shifts that we need to get away from is the idea that there are these bad radicalisers out there, rather like the sort of Anjem Chowdhury's of the Islamist extremist world, who are reaching out and recruiting children. There will be some of those people, but for a lot of people, the children are finding it themselves. And it's a very bleak and uncomfortable truth, which I think speaks to some real societal problems, as well as specific terrorism problems.
And just a final thought, Jonathan. Jason mentioned there in his conversation with Ken McCullum that what's going on in the Middle East hasn't yet filtered through. When does that filter through? Is that another problem that's coming down the track for security services?
I suspect it is. I think everyone's holding their breath a bit. Things that happen abroad can inspire things happening here. And I think one of the points that he made is that a huge number of plots, serious plots they're seeing, are linked in some way to groups. So when people see groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, and they get caught up in the politics of what's going on overseas, that can generate grievances. Quite why that hasn't translated into more attacks, I don't know. And I think to some extent that is a tribute to the work of the security services and the police.
Jonathan Hall-Casey, really interesting to get your perspective tonight. Thank you so much. That's Jonathan Hall-Casey, independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, of course, Home Affairs editor Jason Farrell as well. Thank you. Now, in other news, a migrant who was inside a hotel targeted during the summer riots in Hull has described hearing people shouting that they needed to burn the building and the people inside. Sky News has spoken to asylum seekers who say it's not their fault they were put up in hotels by the government. Many of them still worry about going out, fearing that the anger directed at them by rioters could flare up again. Our communities correspondent Becky Johnson reports.
From an upstairs window in this migrant hotel in Hull, where he lives, Wahag watched as rioters attacked.
I felt scared. I saw the people throwing stones and rocks on the hotel.
It was a Saturday in August when this hotel housing asylum seekers was targeted as riots spread across the country. The 24-year-old from Yemen told me he'd only arrived in Britain a few months earlier by small boat. We met at this church hall in the city where migrants are offered support. How does it make you feel about the UK, seeing what you saw on that day?
About people, it is mixed because there is some bad people and some good people. I'm worried that if it does happen again, it would be very bad.
The reasons behind the riots this summer are complex. Some driven by racism and hate, but others by a sense that migrants get a better deal, given accommodation and food at taxpayers' expense. Mustafa also lives in the hotel and was there that day.
We are here, they are shouting, we need to burn the hotel, we need to burn the people in the hotel.
We first met Mustafa back in February. Then he was living on a park bench. His asylum claim had been rejected. But he's since put in a fresh claim, so the Home Office gave him a room in the hotel. He doesn't want to show his face. There are other people who were born in Britain who are homeless, who haven't been given a hotel room. Can you understand why people would feel annoyed that you get a hotel room and those people don't?
Of course. It's not our fault. They put me in that hotel.
Many here say they're more scared to go out since the riots.
You don't know who can attack you now. So you're always in fear.
William, who's from Kenya, was taking part in an international carnival parade the day of the violence. As cars and tyres were set on fire nearby, they hid in a community centre.
It's scary. We have to get inside and close the door.
Since the riots, Wahag reveals he's had some news from the Home Office.
Leave to remain. Yeah, leave to remain. Yeah.
He shows us his residence permit. His is one of many cases dealt with since Labour came to power, the government doing what it said it would, restarting asylum processing to clear the backlog.
The previous government, they wanted to deport us, but now they make the procedure easier for us.
So you like the Labour government?
Yes.
OK. In a city where unease about migration helped fuel such violence, the reality is these people are here and they're hoping to stay. Becky Johnson, Sky News, Hull.
Well, Becky's with me in the studio now. And Becky, many of our viewers will remember the scenes from the riots in Hull and the attack on that hotel. We didn't see the view from inside out, and we certainly haven't really heard from anyone inside that hotel, presumably because they've been too scared to talk.
Yeah, the truth is, I think, many of the people who were inside those migrant hotels that were targeted across the country have been too scared to speak out. And, those men did bravely decide to speak to me and tell me their experiences. And a couple of things really struck me speaking to them. They completely understand the frustration of some people that asylum seekers get given hotel accommodation. They get it. What they don't feel is fair is that the anger is directed towards them because they say, look, it's UK government policy to house asylum seekers in hotels. They didn't choose that. In fact, many of them say they'd rather be allowed to work so they could pay their own way. Now, of course, they're not allowed to work unless their asylum claim is processed and they get a positive decision from the Home Office. And under the previous government, most of the processing had simply stopped. So people were coming in, the numbers in hotels were just building and building and building. Of course, cost to the taxpayer of millions of pounds a day. Now, Labour did say that when they came to power, they were going to start tackling that backlog to get the cost of asylum hotel accommodation down. And indeed, that's what they're doing. We're seeing lots of people being processed quite quickly, including Wahag, who you saw in my report, who's been given leave to remain. Now, that means very shortly he's going to have to leave that taxpayer-funded accommodation. He'll have to fend for himself, effectively, find a job and find some accommodation. But when you hear him say, I like the government have made things easier for me, rightly or wrongly, because the government is now speeding up this processing to get that hotel bill down, rightly or wrongly, though, the asylum seekers feel that the Labour government is on their side. And that may then fuel that sense among the people who rioted and people who sympathise with them that somehow asylum seekers are still getting help from the government or a better deal from the government than they are. And certainly the mood among asylum seekers is there is fear that the riots are not over and that really we have an uneasy peace that could easily spark again.
OK, Becky, thank you. Becky Johnson with that report there, thank you. Now, the UK's population has risen by 1% in a year to just over 68 million people, mainly due to net migration. It's the largest annual increase since 1971. Our data and forensics editor, Ed Conway, has been taking a look at the numbers.
We've just had some extraordinary population figures that have come through. Some of it might be unsurprising, but some of it, I think, is pretty shocking. This is showing you the overall picture. So this is the UK population going back the last 100 years or so, and the latest number, mid-2023, 68.3 million. That increase, actually, if we look at this, OK, so break it down, don't just look at the level, but look at the changes, so anything going up or down year on year. This particular bar here, that is the single biggest increase that we've seen, just under 1%. The single biggest increase in the population that we've seen going all the way back to 1948. OK, so a massive year in terms of the increase in the population. Why did it increase? Well, let's drill down. OK, so what we'll look at is, here's the bar for 2022. We'll take this over here and explain why it is, what contributed to it going up, OK? So 2022, 67.6 million. Usually, one of the main things pushing up the population is what's happening with domestic births and deaths, OK? So you've got domestic births, that was 664,000, so that pushed it up. But here's what's pretty much unprecedented. The number of deaths in the UK over that period was actually higher, so 680,000. And so just look at that bar. It is below where it was last year, if you're just looking at the UK, the natural population. It's the first time we've seen that in a serious sense, basically ever, going back through recorded history. And the main thing that, in the end, pushed this bar up, so it got to that record level, was net migration. So, you know, we knew that net migration was really high in 2023. I guess what we didn't know is that is the entirety of the explanation for a massive increase in the population. It's seismic stuff here. And when it comes to that domestic story about births minus deaths, that is really the new news we're learning about here. This is going back all the way over the past century and a bit, showing you births each year and deaths each year. And look at this white line, down into negative territory. So that is the natural population falling at the fastest rate in modern history, a big moment for the UK. And they say demographics is destiny. Well, we're learning a lot more about the UK population here.
So to come here on the UK Tonight, former soldier Daniel Khalif goes on trial over espionage charges. We'll bring you all the details from the first day in court. As water firms are fined for poor performance, we'll speak to one woman who's taking her local firm to court for dumping sewage in the sea. And how cuddling for warmth saved their lives. We'll hear the stories of these climbers stranded on a Himalayan mountain for 3 days.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
And now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way.
Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, and it's evident that the boat seriously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world. I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
The biggest party Tripoli has ever seen.
That's it. It got us then. There's a lot of action going on, a lot of hits coming in still. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place in news.
Clearly not had very much to eat at all. A lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at her arms. I can put my entire hand round.
This is the cocktail of drugs which the doctors at this hospital have been giving their coronavirus patients. Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
Mother Nature can be vicious, absolutely savage. The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Whoa! Close and personal with the rhino.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.
Hello, welcome back. Water firms in England and Wales have been ordered to return more than £150 million to customers because of poor performance. The water regulator, Ofwat, said the money would come off bills for households and businesses across 2025 and 2026. It comes after companies missed key targets on pollution and leaks. Well, campaigner Jo Bateman joins me now. She is taking legal action against South West Water for dumping sewage in the sea near her home. Jo, good to see you. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. I know that your pursuit of legal action against your local water company is still ongoing. I wonder what you make of today's announcement. You're going to get a bit of a refund because of what you're enduring there.
Yeah, let's not get too excited though, shall we? 158 million, it sounds like lots of money. The Ofwat, the EA, the water companies bandy about these huge figures. 158 million means that each household, it's not even each person, will get approximately £6. I mean, it's almost an insult, really, isn't it? The water companies jointly want to put water bills up by 33% by 2030. So I don't think £6 per household is really going to cut the mustard. And I think it's really, to me, that's a bit of a PR exercise. It's Ofwat wanting us to think that they're holding the water companies to account, that they're making them do something. And they might as well not bother if that's all they can come up with.
Jo, how much is your water bill at the moment, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, how much do I owe them at the moment?
Yeah.
I think I owe them a couple of £100 because, of course, I'm not paying the sewage part of my bill. So the amount that I owe them is building up.
Yeah. And what have you been getting for your money? It's worth reminding us as to why you took a stand.
Yeah. I get clean water coming out of the taps. That's why I pay the non-sewage part of my bill. South West Water say on their own website that they are responsible for dealing with the processing of our wastewater responsibly. I don't call literally thousands and thousands of dumps of raw sewage into our local waterways, dealing with it responsibly. So I'm not paying it. I've told them I'm withholding it. And when they do what I think I'm paying for, then I might start considering paying my water bill again, the sewage part.
Water companies do say that sewage going into seas and rivers are only ever emergency measures, or it happens when there's too much rain, environmental factors. And I wonder what your response is to that, because it does seem, when you look at it written down, that they can put sewage into the sea in an emergency measure. You do wonder why there isn't another way.
Yeah, well, the other way is to have the right infrastructure in place. So to stop putting billions of pounds into shareholders' pockets and executives' bonuses and actually enhance the infrastructure so that it's in a place, so that it's in a place where it can actually cope with what's going into it without having to be spilt untreated into our rivers and seas.
Jo, you don't swim in the sea anymore, do you, near your home?
No, I do.
Oh, you've gone back out?
No, I've never stopped. I stopped going when there has been a sewage dump, and I don't go for 48 hours after that sewage dump ends, which is in accordance with the advice given by the World Health Organization. So
and how regularly do you have to check your app? Because there's an app, isn't there, where you can check your local waterways?
Every single day.
Every single day there's a sewage leak?
No, not every single day is there a leak. I have to check the app to make sure that there hasn't been one. At the moment, I haven't swum since last Thursday, and apart from Friday, I think I couldn't have swum because of sewage dumps in the sea since then, and we've had a fair amount of rain today. It's not exceptional. It rains in this country. This is what the water companies need to get a grip of. We live in a wet country. We are known around the world for it. It's been raining here since the year dot. Climate change actually hasn't changed that significantly. It's just a very poor excuse for not enhancing the infrastructure and maintaining it properly.
Yeah, infrastructure that hasn't been updated since the Victorian ages on any sort of grand scale, and here we are in 2024.
It's not even all Victorian. It's a lot of it is much newer than that, but it still needs to be maintained, and it's not.
How do you keep the pressure on the water companies? Because there's a new government, there's a new Labour government who have promised a review of the water sector, an introduction of a water bill. Since taking office in July, the Labour government has announced a series of proposed reforms, promising customers higher compensation for sewage failures and the power to hold executives to account. It plans to introduce new measures to ensure that money earmarked for investment in improvements cannot be diverted to pay salaries or dividends. All sounds good.
Sounds good. Be interesting to see how it pans out. I'm pretty cynical. I believe that the laws that we need to hold them to account and to basically force them to do what is needed, although those laws are already in place, they're not being enforced. The Environment Agency has had a lot of its funding removed by previous governments, and that's part of the problem. Ofwat and the government, ultimately the government at the top are really responsible, but it's the government, Ofwat, the Environment Agency, all need to put huge pressure on the water companies and really, you know, saying that they're going to give us back £6 per household, you know, that's nothing. That's absolutely nothing. What difference is that going to make? Absolutely none. They talk about fining the water companies for repeated offences. Why repeated? If I threw a brick through a shop window, they wouldn't pat me on the back and say, there, go away, but don't do it again. And if you do, we might have to fine you. I'd be locked up straight away. Why are they not being fined every single time they offend? And they do that a lot. The BBC revealed that in 2022, there was approximately 6,000 illegal sewage discharges. There were probably many more than that. But 6,000 is 6,000 too many.
Yeah. OK. Jo, really good to talk to you. We will speak again on this issue. It's really good to talk to you. Jo Bateman there, who is suing South West Water over sewage dumps in her local water. In response to those claims, South West Water has said this: we are serious about tackling storm overflows, and changes of this scale takes time, ambition and increased investment. We're investing around £38 million in the Exmouth area up to 2030, which includes upgrades to our pumping stations and treatment works to significantly reduce the number of spills and further protect the environment. Former soldier Daniel Khalifa has gone on trial today on terrorism charges. He appeared in court earlier, accused of passing on sensitive information that may be useful to an enemy and for escaping Wandsworth Prison. He has denied any wrongdoing. Sky's Rachel Venables sent us this update from court.
This afternoon, the prosecution began laying out in great detail the case as they see it against Daniel Khalifa, the 23-year-old former soldier who's on trial here at Woolwich Crown Court over the next 6 weeks or so, accused of passing sensitive information that may be useful to an enemy and of escaping from Wandsworth Prison last year. Now, Khalifa appeared in court today wearing a blue shirt and a navy sleeveless jumper as the jury was sworn in the middle of the afternoon, so there wasn't long for the prosecution to begin outlining their case. He and the jury listening quietly and passively as Mark Haywood KC began to outline the case against him, addressing the jury and outlining first and foremost the 4 charges that exist against the 23-year-old. He's accused one count of gathering, publishing or communicating information that might be useful to an enemy, in this case Iran. He's also accused of eliciting or trying to elicit personal information about armed forces personnel that was likely to be useful to a person committing or planning an act of terrorism. A third charge against him involves what's been described as a bomb hoax at his barracks in Beaconside in Staffordshire. And then a fourth charge against him is that the 23-year-old is alleged to have escaped from HMP Wandsworth last September while he was on remand there for the previous charges. Now, the prosecution went into some detail around the start of his career in the British Army. He claimed that Khalif had no intention of simply getting his head down, but began to think almost immediately of espionage. This was the language of Mark Haywood KC, saying he began to think of espionage during his initial trays of feigning with the British Army. He said that soon afterwards, Khalif contacted someone with the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. That was in April 2019, weeks after he passed his security clearance. He's also accused of travelling soon after that to North London to pick up what was described as a dog poo bag that had been filled with £1,500 worth of cash from his handlers. And he also later that year told MI6 that he wanted to be a double agent. Well, the lawyer for the prosecution will continue to outline the case, the opening of his case tomorrow. This court hearing due to last for the next 6 weeks. And Daniel Khalif denies all of the charges against him.
Still to come on the UK tonight, a warning from hospices over a lack of funding as charities call on the government for help. Hospices are calling on the government to take action over funding, with the sector reportedly facing unsustainable financial pressures. The charity Hospice UK has revealed they are now having to rely on a larger income from their charity shops than they get in funding from Westminster. The organisation said their research shows charity shops would have to sell more than 5,000 pairs of jeans to fund just one palliative care nurse for a year. Well, let's get more on this with Michelle Rollinson, who is the Chief Executive of St Andrew's Hospice in Grimsby, and Charlie King from the charity Hospice UK, who I quoted there. Charlie, I'll come to you first if I can. There's a big shortfall in funding. Talk to me about what you're getting from the charity sector and what you're getting from the government.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah-Jane. A lot of people might not know that hospices are funded, on average, around about 1/3 comes from the government and 2/3 comes from charitable giving. So that means, as you've said, second-hand jeans and other clothes and bric-a-brac being sold in shops, people running marathons and getting sponsorship for that, people leaving gifts in their wills to hospices, and that makes up, two-thirds nationally of the amount of money that hospices get. So just £1 in every 3 comes from the government, from the NHS. And what we're saying now is that that's not sustainable. And as we've seen in the past few months, hospice services will close and be reduced unless the government is able to provide more support going forward.
Michelle, St Andrew's Hospice costs nearly £6 million a year to run. How much of that are you having to come up with yourself?
Yeah, so hi, Sarah-Jane. We're having to raise over 5 million ourselves. So as a hospice providing adult and children's care, we get around about 18% of our funding from the government. The rest of the funding we have to find ourselves, so as you say, about 5 million.
That is a lot for one hospice. Talk to me about the efforts that are being made in Grimsby to help this happen.
Yeah, I mean, we could not do what we do without the support of our local community. I mean, that's without a doubt. I think the generosity of people that donate, that leave money in legacies, but also with this being Hospice Week and us celebrating the charity retail and the hospice retail sector, donating into our shops, coming in and buying goods, actually volunteering and giving their time to be able to enable the money to be raised. There is just so much community support that is just keeping us going.
Charlie, we did hear of a hospice up in Liverpool having to close its doors for a number of reasons, but one of them was the pressure of trying to come up with funds. What is the future like if the government doesn't step in to help you?
That's absolutely right. We're really concerned that we're going to see more service reductions and closures. And I think most people would agree, if they've had the benefit of being looked after by a hospice, most people would really vouch for how important, how brilliant that care is at such an important time in people's lives. One of the things we're saying to the government is that actually, if you listen to what their agenda is around what they want to achieve with the healthcare system, one of the big things they're saying is that they want to move more people out of hospitals, stop them being cared for in hospitals, and look after them out in their community, either at home or potentially in a hospice or care home. And one of the things we're saying is that we're actually here to help with that. We can play a huge role in that shift that the government wants to achieve, but we do need the government to pay its fair share in order to help us to do that. And what we've seen is the rate that costs are going up. As Michelle's described, people are fantastically generous in communities around the country, but we don't think it's fair that communities have to keep picking up those increasing costs if the government won't do its part as well.
Yeah, as you said, the government says community-led care to free up NHS provisions is a big part of the way forward, and the plans to revitalise the health services. Hospices have a big role to play in that shift. There are NHS hospices, there are independent hospices. Michelle, can you talk to me about how St Andrews is coping with this? Because presumably if you don't get the correct funding, there are families out there you just cannot help, and that is an awful position for everyone to be in.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think, like I said, for us to be able to provide the care, we need that support from the government. We need that framework in place. I think, being able to support those families, and having to make some difficult decisions. Fortunately, we're not in that position at the moment as a hospice, but if we continue with the same funding levels that we get, then we know that in 3, 4, 5 years' time, there is the risk that the hospice will not be available for the families of our areas as well. And I think just to pick up something that Charlie said as well, as hospices, we want to be part of the solution. We want to be able to support. We know that we can help with some of those pressures that are being experienced through the hospitals, through the NHS. And by working collaboratively with our community providers as well, we can really provide that community care close to home for the patient and prevent some of those hospital admissions as well. So it's about us being part of the conversation. It's about us being engaged and integrated with the NHS and actually for them to recognise the value and the importance of the care that the hospices can provide.
Yeah, Charlie, this is a new government looking to make an impact, looking to make changes. This could be seen as an easy win for them in terms of fitting into their NHS plan, helping families, helping hospices. What would you say to the government, to those with the power to do something if they're listening tonight?
I mean, look, we understand that the health and social care system is under really significant strain, and the government has got difficult decisions to make. It's got huge numbers of parts of the system saying, look, we're in crisis, we're under severe pressure. We recognise that. However, we do feel that one, this is a part of the system that is so critical. We're talking about the most important moments towards the end of people's lives, and it's not good enough for that care not to be available for absolutely everybody who needs it. And secondly, we're effectively giving the government a really heavily subsidised, if you like, contribution to the system. It's very good value because hospices are so generously supported by communities like the one that Michelle's talked about in Grimsby. Actually, we provide brilliant value to the taxpayer. And when hospices reduce their services, as we are seeing around the country, in all different parts of the country, hospices having to cut back their services, those patients just have to go back into the NHS system and be supported by the mainstream NHS, back in hospitals, by GP practices, etc. And so it's counterproductive in the extreme, really, to allow hospices to be in that position to cut back their services. And so what we'd say to the government is yes, work with us because we want to help you deliver your agenda, but we do need the right support. We do need the right funding streams in place. And in the long term, we really need to reform how hospices are funded in the way that Michelle's described, so that they can be there for more families into the future.
Charlie King from Hospice UK and Michelle Rollinson, Chief Executive of St Andrew's Hospice in Grimsby. Thank you so much for coming on to the show tonight. We'll continue to follow this story because it's one that affects so many families in the UK. We have had a response to this story this evening from the Department of Health and Social Care, a spokesperson saying this government has inherited huge challenges in the hospice sector, as well as a £22 billion black hole in the public finances. So these problems will take time to fix. We are determined to shift more healthcare out of hospitals and into the community to ensure patients and their families receive personalised care in the most appropriate setting. So to come on the UK Tonight, how cuddling for warmth saved their lives. The story of 2 climbers stranded on a Himalayan mountain for 3 days. And it has been an eventful week already off the field at Manchester City. We'll be discussing this and more in sports on the way next.
Hello and welcome to Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, the podcast equivalent of a Pro Plus caffeine tablet that tells you everything about what you need to know the day ahead in British politics in under 20 minutes.
My name is Jack Blanchard of Politico. With me in the Zoom call is Sam Coates of Sky News.
The front runner among the members, Kelly Badenoch, did much worse than I was expecting. Now, traditionally and historically, MPs want to rush to back early the front-run a candidate because it helps your chances of getting a job further down the track. It's good to be seen to be there early with the person who's going to win. And the fact that even though she was topping a lot of the surveys, that she didn't get more than 6 votes behind Robert Jenrick is very ominous for her campaign.
This issue had sort of bubbled away a bit last week. It was always going to come back this week because of the vote, but it was rather blown up again on Thursday due to a very prominent Labour Party commentator wading in on it and saying that Rachel Reeves might need an escape route. Now, that person was Ed Balls, who used possibly one of the most prominent Labour figures to speak about Treasury matters.
Oh my God.
What happened?
Sorry, I've got my cat is fighting another cat through the window. I'm going to have to stop it.
There's a cat fight.
They have breached the road. There is a lot of gas being fired all around us. It is an absolute carnival kind of atmosphere out here for Prime Minister Modi's decisive victory. These students are defying the prohibitory order, and now they're going to be arrested. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. This on any given day would have been bustling with people, but today it's absolutely deserted. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Hello, welcome back. Tiddy's here with the sport, and you can always rely on Manchester City for something to talk about, can't you, in the sports bulletin? What's been going on today?
Well, yesterday, you may remember, I'll try and make this as interesting as I can, because it was a tribunal case yesterday, wasn't it, between the Premier League and Manchester City. They both claimed victory last night in the verdict. City had said that the associated party transaction laws of the Premier League had been found to be unlawful and therefore null and void, which they'd been opposing. The Premier League said broadly they'd been supported in their framework, and they claimed victory. But then the Premier League emailed last night the 19 other, or 20 clubs actually, including Manchester City, with a summary of it. City then hit back to their general counsel, Simon Cliff, and said that a lot of that was misleading. And also they're very concerned that there's new rules are planned for the next 10 days, which hasn't been confirmed by the Premier League in any case, but they said that they could likely lead to further legal proceedings. So associated party transaction deals are those from companies or people associated with a club with an interest, be it financial or otherwise. So very interested to see how this goes. There were clubs on both sides supporting it yesterday, so it's going to be one to watch in the coming weeks how that develops. And meanwhile, we've still got the case into 115 allegations of financial rule breaking from Manchester City by the Premier League, which Man City deny. So it's all going on at the moment internally.
And you did make that
clubs.
Interesting, Teddy. Well done.
Oh, thank you very much. It was quite a bit of a word soup, but we got there in the end. Meanwhile, it's Manchester United in the news as well, off the field. News of that in just a second.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
When I joined Wigan, I needed time. You know, the first thing they asked me is to change the style of play. But I need time to change the style of play. I need time to recruit players who could play the style of play. I need time to do coaching session to improve the players. People expect you to come and then change everything like that. It doesn't work like that. When you want to play the style of play that everyone wants to play, you know, beautiful football, you need the players who can do that. As coaches or managers, we need to keep pushing. Whenever we have opportunity to do well, we have to do well, of course. But before you do well, you need the opportunity.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
A British mountaineer and her American climbing partner have been rescued after being stranded in the Himalayas for 3 days without food or shelter. Faye Manners and Michelle Dvorak say they survived by cuddling for warmth. Sky's Matthew Thompson has the story.
lost a mitten.
It began as the climb of a lifetime. Smiling faces, breathtaking scenery, and a daunting cliff face.
I think this rock spur is way too big right now.
Too big for us.
Yeah.
British climber Faye Manners and her American companion Michelle Dvorak were attempting to climb Chowkamba Mountain in the Indian Himalayas. The mountain has 4 peaks. The one they were attempting to climb is just under 7,000 metres high. The climbers had made it to 6,400 metres, about 5 times the height of Ben Nevis, when disaster struck.
Unfortunately, yeah, there was some loose rock on the mountain, which dislodged and, to our detriment, had cut the rope that all of our equipment was on. We got quite far up the mountain, so the bag flew quite a long way.
Stranded in the freezing cold, the woman sent a distress signal to their base camp. Without any food or shelter, they settled down to wait and hope.
We didn't have tent or stove or much food really at all, so we ended up doing a lot of what you can see there. Snuggling to stay warm, and when it was very snowy, it did become a little bit scary with how cold and wet it was.
Bad weather meant rescue helicopters couldn't find the pair as they spent 2 days clinging to the rock face and to life itself.
Unfortunately, around 11 a.m. or 12 p.m. during the day, these clouds would come and fog. It would engulf us.
Saviors!
Eventually, a group of French climbers helped the woman descend to a place that they could be rescued, and they were airlifted to safety. Incredibly, just days after their dice with death, they're already thinking about going back. Matthew Thompson, Sky News.
Yeah, incredible indeed. That's it from us for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow night at 8. Next up, it's The World with Yalda Hakim, live from Jerusalem.